Amy, so glad to have you on an N of One. You and I are old friends. We've been at this for a while. I will just bleep out the years. We've been at it for a while, and I'm so excited to help talk a little bit about your story today because I think you have a really interesting trajectory into this field, and of course now you're a chief behavioral officer, so you're where people want to go. So hopefully this tells us how to get there.
Yeah.
I want to start with early Amy, and this is
hmm
stories. These are stories I don't even know. I want to know about like 7-year-old, 6-year-old Amy. Like when you were a kid, what was Amy like? What did she think she was going to do in the future? If I had asked you a 7-year-old, like, what are you going to be? What would Amy have said?
I would have said a writer. And I know this for a fact because I kept a diary and I put in that diary, I will be a writer.
And
I
like in a traditional like fiction writer sort of sense of the word.
I don't know that I've thought it through that much, to be honest, but I bet you that that's what I would have said. I have always loved to read, like always, always. I mean, you can see a very small collection of my books in the background here. I have hundreds of books upstairs. I've always been like a book reader, actor. I do read nonfiction, but my preferences have always tended more towards fiction. I think the way some people love movies and TV, I love losing myself in, a fictional world inside of a book. But I have always loved writing, really anything. Like as a kid, I was very into school, very nerdy. I was like, I wasn't a straight A student because I got a letter grade for handwriting, and I have never had great handwriting, Catholic school. But yeah, and I'm also left-handed, which, handicap in terms of handwriting. But I remember, and this was also longhand, because I won't say my age, but I'm old enough that I wasn't working on computers growing up. I remember, writing by longhand, like social studies, essays, and things, and just loving it, like losing myself, getting into that flow state. But I think I probably would have visualized myself more as a fiction writer. It did turn out, though, I'm horrible at it. I'm not very good at character development or dialogue writing, so I have much better skills at nonfiction writing.
But as a 7-year-old, you don't know that yet.
No, no. And I
As far
actually,
as
now that I
fiction.
say that, I had forgotten. I did used to write stories. My grandfather, my dad's father was an accountant, and he used to give me paper. So like he worked and he would get that like sticker tape paper that would go in the old calculators, and he had graphing paper, like very cool paper. And I used to write stories, like fiction stories on that paper. And I remember I used to ball them up and throw them away when I wasn't happy with them. And I found out years later my mom had rescued a lot of them and like smoothed them out and put them in a box. And I was so mad because I'm like, no, those weren't good. That's why I got rid of them.
Wait, sorry.
Um,
At what age did you find this out and were mad? Because I feel like if I found that out at 15, I might be mad. If I found that out at 25 or 35 or 45, thanks, Mom.
yeah, I was more like 15. My parents moved house when I was in college, so it was before that.
Ah, got it. I also
Yeah.
love, by the way, the like, we are really dating ourselves by being like, cool paper, right? Was a
Yeah.
big, 100%. I totally remember getting scratch paper from work from my dad and that, being a source of.
It is, but I'm convinced actually there's a weird genetics about some of this stuff. So I have an 11-year-old niece, my brother's daughter, and she also loves cool paper, even though she has like an iPad and an Apple Watch. For her birthday a few years ago, I was in Paris right before her birthday, and I went to a stationery store and just bought her cool paper, and she was thrilled. And like she writes on it, she uses it, and I'm like, there's something. I'm not her parent. I didn't teach her this,
Something's
but she
going
loves
on
it as much
here.
as I did.
It is, I mean, if if you've never, folks, if you are listening to this podcast, treat yourself to some really good paper. I think a lot of people have never really engaged with like high quality, like really like high mill, like vellum type.
Yeah, well, even right here, I have my I bought this in the UK. It's like a cool graphic. I love paper.
Amy, I know what I'm gonna get you for your next event here now.
All
Now I
right.
know next time that this is gonna
Yeah,
happen. I'll bring you
excellent.
cool paper. So
Yeah.
7-year-old's like, I'm gonna be a writer. I'm all in on this. You mentioned I love school. I was a nerd.
hmm
Was it unique to writing, or you sort of love the whole process of school and the whole sort of thing?
I loved the whole thing. I don't know why. I just there was something about the structure of the school day. I think even now I am a very structured sort of person. So to get a little bit into the B-side stuff, like I think one of the reasons I've always liked self-determination theory is that competence bit really speaks to me. Like I'm a person where you give me a deadline and some rules and a structure and I am off and I'm going to figure this out. And school gave that to me, very early on. I'm also an oldest child, and I think that might be a traditional oldest child thing. I liked all the subjects though. I think writing, reading, those were always my favorite. Like I always loved my English classes, but I mentioned social studies and history. I am not terrible at math. I always kind of liked math too. It didn't gravitate toward that as much as I got older. But as a younger student, I really liked that as well. I used to love the standardized tests. I mean, I was like, wow, this is a very clear task that I can knock out and get a good score on. Just very nerdy.
Yeah, I mean, and I hear there's a little bit of an achievement orientation there, right? Like,
Definitely.
yeah. And does that persist? So if we fast forward a little bit and we sort of go to like 13, 14-year-old Amy, does she still want to be a writer, or has that sort of shifted a little bit?
I think when I got to be a teenager, I no longer really knew what I wanted to do. I was very focused on kind of the moment, doing really well in high school. I knew I wanted to go to college period, which I think a lot about this looking back. My parents did not have college degrees at that point. My dad graduated college when I was a senior in high school. He had dropped out midway through his undergrad and became a firefighter, and then started going back to school part time and earning the credits he needed for his degree. And my mom had finished high school and then got married and became a mom, and she went to nursing school when I was a teenager and got her RN. So neither of my parents had a post-secondary education when I was growing up as a kid, but they always instilled in me that it was really important that I pursue that. So that was sort of what I was fixated on in high school, was like that next step of getting to college, and not necessarily so much thinking about what I would do when I was there. And so when I was applying to college, I was like, oh, obviously I'll be an English major because I love the reading and the writing and the fiction and the literature. And I just hadn't really interrogated it more than that. And so it was a little bit of a rude awakening when I got to college and realized that the things that I love to do weren't necessarily the things that would make a meaningful career for me. And not to say that people can't have a meaningful career doing that, but those weren't the ingredients for me. And as soon as I started exploring them in that college environment, I realized that.
Yeah. Um, One of the things we notice after doing about 30, 40 episodes of this is, even though it's an N of one, you can start to detect some patterns, right? Like, there's a disproportionate number of, my parents, I'm a first generation college kid, right? Like my mom's also
Mhm.
a nurse. um there's a disproportionate number of us that, like, love school, I think, a little bit because our parents didn't have it or didn't have the same
Yeah.
opportunities that we did, and so that sort of unsurprisingly sort of manifests in a very particular kind of drive and interrogation of the world, maybe. What, when you were going, I hear when you got to college, you sort of like had a rude awakening from in English, but I want to take just a tiny step back. When you were picking colleges, given that you didn't quite know what you wanted to do, you'd had exposure to things in high school, but you hadn't really landed on something. How were you sort of figuring out where to go?
Yeah, that was a difficult process. So I ended up going to Harvard, and I'll tell you quite honestly, I didn't think I was going to get in. One of the reasons I applied, I grew up in the Boston area, really close to Harvard, and in some ways that made it a less appealing place to me because I wanted the adventure of like, leaving and going out somewhere. But I did love Harvard Square. That was like a very cool place to hang out after school, and I wasn't allowed to hang out there. But again, because we didn't have cell phones, it was not that hard. Kids in the 90s, you just sort of like showed up at home around dinner time and your parents were like, "Yeah, I'm sure you're alive." Everything was good.
Amy's mom, just so you know,
Yeah.
she's outing herself there.
Yep, yep. So, I applied there basically because I was like, well, wouldn't that be cool? And obviously I'll never get in. And then I got in, and when I got in, it was like, who turns that down? Like I can't possibly turn that down. So that was kind of the beginning and end of that thought process. But I did apply to other schools, and I was actually very attracted to the sort of smaller liberal arts school because, again, I thought I was going to do this like cool, artsy, like English major thing. I didn't apply to Oberlin, but like that was kind of the sort of school that I thought I wanted to go to. I remember McAllister in Vermont really caught my attention. We did go, my parents drove me out to Williams College in Western Mass, and we didn't go on the tour because, and this was actually an important moment of self-discovery, and I think why I didn't apply to some of these other places. We were like three-quarters of the way through that drive, and I was like, oh my God, we're so far from a city. I need to go home. I need to go back to an urban environment. Where's the concrete? And ended up, focusing more on like urban colleges. But it was like once I heard Harvard would have me, I just kind of was like, all right, I have to do this.
Yeah, I mean, small liberal arts colleges are, I went to Swarthmore, right? But like, I think Pomona, like there's a whole sort
Mhm.
of constellation of places that have turned out a kind of interesting social psyche kind of person because of the cross-disciplinary nature and things. But,
Yeah.
one of the downsides is there are very few small liberal arts colleges that are, Swarthmore is nearish Philly, but it's not in Philly by any sort of stretch of
Mhm.
if you had grown up in Boston, it would not feel like it was in Philly, right? So wait, so you get to Harvard, like you're going, okay, maybe it's not English. Did you start to take some psychology? Like, where did we start to go? Hey, maybe there's some other things other than, so you crash land into, well, it's not English. Then what?
Oh, this is a ridiculous story. So at the time, and actually I feel bad because I'm watching my cousin's kids all apply to college now, and apparently you have to apply to a major, not just to a school, which oof. Harvard at the time, you had to declare your major after your first semester freshman year. So I show up freshman year, and they have, a couple prerequisite courses you have to take your first year. So I'm enrolled in those. And then I enrolled in like the intro English courses, and it was like halfway through the semester. I'm like, oh no,
Oh
this isn't
no.
what I want to do. I remember distinctly we had to fill out this form, a Scantron form, and return it back to the office, declaring our concentration is the term that they used. And I remember sitting in the living room of the dorm suite that I lived in going, I don't know what to do. Like the only thing I know is that it can't be English. And one of my roommates said, well, my sister double majors in English and psychology. You should put psychology. And I put psychology. Like that was literally it. And the next semester, I enrolled in two
And,
psychology
and you
courses.
had not taken a psych class
No,
when
I'd
you
never taken a
lost the
psych class,
school.
never.
That's amazing.
And I'm like so lucky that it worked out. But I do think there is something to it because part of why I love reading, why I love fiction is getting into the psychology of characters. And I think that's one of the reasons I actually prefer reading to, movies and visual media because you get the glimpses into the way that a person thinks and the way that they're reacting that you don't necessarily see on a screen. So I think that, whether intentionally or not, my roommate maybe picked up on that being one of the things that I loved about reading and literature. And she did actually, she was a double major in English and religion. So she and I shared that interest in reading and literature. My one of those psych courses, the intro to psych course I took was taught by Richard Hackman, who was amazing, like just an amazing experience to get to have. And I had no idea that he was like a legendary psychologist when I took the course. But the exposure to him at that point in my education was, I think, really important, and it made me, if not fully love the subject at that point, at least see places where I could fall in love.
So the glimmer of spring, maybe not
Yeah.
full on summer, but the glimmer of spring
Yeah,
has a
yeah. And then the
promise.
thing I had to do because I had no prior exposure to psychology is I had to take all the survey courses, intro to personality, intro to cognition, intro to what they called abnormal psychology, although it was clinical psychology. The one I didn't take, funny enough, was intro to social psychology, and that's what I kind of ended up doing. But it was because I got involved in research in social psychology around that same time. And so I sort of skipped the survey course in favor of the hands-on experience.
And what sort of brought you to the research place? You just started dropping in on lab meetings. Like where did that sort of come about?
They had a course, I think it was 1558R, but it was a course. So for course credit, you actually worked as a research assistant. And I remember they did a thing at Harvard called shopping period. So the first like 2 weeks of the semester, you could go to any course, whether or not you were registered for it, and shop it. And so I remember going to the shopping period for that particular course, and the various grad students and professors who had openings for RAs in their labs got up and gave brief presentations. And there were a couple where I was like, ooh, that's really cool.
I
And so
might
then
want to do that.
Yeah, so you network with them a little bit, and if it's a little bit more like interviewing for a job than just registering for the course. But if there's mutual willingness, you can register for the course, and then you work for them for a certain number of hours per semester, and you get course credit for it, pass fail. And so that was my first RA experience. And then after that, I don't remember at this point if I was able to take the course multiple times or if I just became like a regular RA after that. But I stayed with the same lab for the rest of my undergraduate time.
And that was a social psych oriented.
Yeah, it was Nalini Ambady
Oh yeah.
was the who was wonderful, and she was really instrumental in my grad school progression. But I worked directly with Margaret Shee and Todd Patinsky, who were her grad students. So Margaret's at UCLA Anderson now, and I'm actually not sure where Todd is. He was at Yale for a while, but they were both really great to work with.
And so you had this wonderful undergraduate experience. Did you think, if I ask you now, where, now we fast forward, I've talked to you as a 7-year-old, I've talked to you as a 14-year-old, now we fast forward a little bit. Did you think that I could and then I go get a PhD and then I become my professor and I basically, was that sort of the theory?
No, it's funny talking about you with this. I'm like, wow, I really stumbled into into my career every step of the way. No, that wasn't the theory at all. What ended up happening at junior year, people start thinking about career, and just like I was always so achievement oriented and stuff, which made Harvard hard for me because I was around a lot of people who were like that and even more so and felt very out of my depth a lot. So people are starting to interview with like, McKinsey and Bain, like all these companies coming to campus and doing their recruitment. And I sort of recognized that probably wasn't for me. Oh, I'm going to go into iBanking. I'm like, I'm not going into
Yeah.
iBanking. But didn't
Also,
know what I yeah,
as a first generation kid from a particular thing, what is iBanking exactly?
I still don't know what iBanking is to be honest. Uh, but I loved what I was doing, and I remember sitting in Nalini's office. We were working on my undergrad thesis, and so the thesis had to be supervised by a faculty member. So even though day to day I was working more with Margaret and Todd, Nalini was the one who, I had to meet with her regularly on the actual thesis project. And I remember her dictate, she was like, well, you need to go to grad school. And she was dictating to me a list of schools that I applied to. I applied to 10 grad schools, and they were the 10 grad schools Nalini told me I should apply to. And the reason she picked them, this is where I was lucky because she wasn't just shooting from the hip. She had grown to know me, she knew what I was interested in. And she was recommending schools that either had programs or faculty members that were researching things relative to my interests. So they were, smart, targeted recommendations. Michigan was on the list. I ended up going there, and Margaret was there as a faculty member, a brand new faculty member, and was my first advisor. But it was really just because I remember talking to Nalini being like, I don't know what to do. I love what I'm doing in your lab, but I don't know where I can do that as a career. And she said, well, you got to go to grad school.
And
And that was,
what was
yeah.
that research interest, right? Like, as you started to do, you said, hey, she really picked up on my interests and matched me with schools that were that.
Mhm.
If I'd asked Nalini, hey, what is Amy interested in studying? What do you think she would have said?
What she would have said at the time is I was interested in stereotype threat and stereotype boost because that those were the terms that we were using to describe our research. But what I was really interested in, and what she was also really interested in, is the effect of sort of micro information, tiny alterations to the environment on your behavior and your experience. So Nalini, sort of gained her reputation around the thin slices research that she did with Robert Rosenthal. She was able to show that you can show people like microseconds of video of somebody, and they can come up with really accurate perceptions of their performance. She was doing stuff with sexual orientation as well, which I don't know if you would do that research today, but this was late 80s, early 90s. And as I look at where I took that work in my career, I kind of evolved away from stereotypes per se. So she evolved into it as that was becoming kind of hot in the field. And then I started, and then I evolved out of it as it stopped becoming hot in the field. And I think today, with the work that I do, it's very much around how do subtle changes in the way that you communicate with somebody lead them to make different choices and go down different roads. And so I think that's really what we both were interested in at heart is like, how can you make these subtle alterations to an environment and have them impact a person's experience?
And so even if it's not, one day, I mean, we obviously at the time we're not using words like applied behavioral science, uh, but it was a, there's a clear application pathway. There is a we're going to change people's behavior version of, I ran an early experiment. I think my first published piece was on, you could just tell people, please try not to stereotype on the next section of the test, and it eliminated the IAT effect, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
like, just like simple directives, simple environmental cues could have these sort of outsized sort of pieces, makes a ton
Hmm.
of sense. I love the story about her guiding you to grad schools because basically Andrew Ward and Barry Schwartz did the same thing for me, except theirs was who's crazy enough to work with this guy? They were like, they didn't pay attention to schools or programs at all. They were just like, what social psychologist can tolerate Matt's personality? These are the people that,
Yep.
that I think will be all right for him. I had sort of an interest in hedonics and some of the, I want people to be happier and healthier.
Right. Right.
But okay, so she puts together this list. You more or less apply to the list.
I did.
What tell me about, I mean, and then you end up at Michigan, which is a very particular kind of department and bent and sort of things. Like, talk to me about crash landing into a PhD and figuring that out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so at this point, I did assume this was the first point where I think I really did think I'm going to go down the academic path because, I mean, that's what a school like Michigan trains you for, or
Yep.
at least at the time it did. I think it probably still does. In PhD programs in general, I don't think of their students as people who might enter the applied field for the most part.
Yep.
Actually, I say that my husband has a PhD in engineering, and he had a really different experience because that is a sort of academic profession where they're putting people out into applied places. But for psychology, social sciences, they're like, okay, we're making an army of academics.
Yeah,
I'm
with clinical is an exception, right? Like, obviously there's
Yes,
a clinical pathway. I gave a talk, internal talk at the APA about like, I was just like, look at this math, okay? Like, see all these undergraduates and master's people who don't become clinicians that you completely ignore? Like,
right.
they are like a real population still, just
Yes.
because they didn't like go the direction you sort of thought they were going to go. But at the time, I think you're right. Particularly, it's maybe less so now, but particularly programs like a Michigan or a big
Hmm.
R1 style institute, we turn out academics who get grants, which funds the school, which does the thing, and this is what we
Yep.
do.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think, for the faculty members, that's a little bit of the what's in it for me. They're training, I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt here. Faculty members have created a research program about something they're passionate about. They're training people in that tradition so that they can continue on that research and, create this really rich body of knowledge around something that they love. So, I think that that is part of what motivates some faculty members to take on their students anyway.
Yeah.
I was in an organizational psychology program. So that was the one sort of weird thing. Nalini was a social psychologist. All of my undergrad training had been in that tradition. And then I landed in an organizational psych program because that was where Margaret's professorship was. And she was my advisor. And the way that they worked it at Michigan is you were assigned to a specific sub program. So I felt a little fish out of water there. In retrospect, I'm really glad. I still consider myself a social psychologist, and I think that the way Michigan thought about it, it was not an IO program, it was just an O program. So we didn't really do a lot of the like psychometrics type work that you find in an IO program. We weren't really, yeah, it was much more focused on, I would say, social dynamics within an organizational context. And one of the things that was really cool is half of my coursework was at the Ross School of Business and half was in the psych department. So I got a really diverse experience in terms of the coursework and exposure to a lot of topics that I find I'm just glad I had that exposure now that I am in this applied and now executive career because I can speak a little bit of the business lingo that I think otherwise would have been more of a learning curve.
Yeah, for sure. As someone who did not get any business training,
Yeah.
like, I have this, when I left grad school to work for a startup, I remember hugging other grad students because I was going to make $60,000. And if you come from a family that is not college educated, that was more money than anybody in my family had ever fucking seen in their lives.
Uh-huh.
And about, I don't know, a month into it, I was like, what's this equity thing? And the founder was like, sorry, you came to work here for the money? And I was like, yeah, isn't that enough? 60 grand. Holy shit, man. He's like,
Yeah.
well, let me explain startup economics to you.
I gotta tell you, that's a thing now, because I do work for a startup, and a lot of the people that, are on my team, it's their first or second job. And that's a conversation I have a lot. I'm like, listen, don't sleep on the equity because people, why would you know? How would you possibly know that it's not just about the salary?
Yeah, I mean, again, unless you get some, like you
Mhm.
have this opportunity to do some stuff in the business school and you start getting a
Yeah.
sense of how companies are actually structured and shares and these parts of things. Where did you, so you're making your way through your PhD. Do you still think you're going to become essentially your advisor and be a professor? Like, where does this start to become a like, maybe this isn't going to be what happens for me?
Yeah, I would say it was around like my third year, so middle of the 5-year program. And I had kind of two competing streams that made me think this wasn't going to be the fit. So one was personal. I'd been in a long-term relationship through college, and that partner moved to Michigan with me, and we stayed together for a little while out there, but then broke up. And I was single, and I was sort of thinking about, what do I want in terms of my personal life? And I thought at the time I wanted to get married and have kids. I am married, I don't have kids. So that part, didn't end up being what I thought I wanted. But just sort of like, if I go on the academic career path, I know that I'm not going to get to choose where in the world I live, right? Like it's luck of the draw. What schools are hiring and where do you get hired? And I had already seen some people, who were struggling to create those personal connections. And I also knew that if I were successful, I might be moving locations every couple of years. And so that really didn't appeal to me. I wanted some stability and some choice in terms of my personal life. And then the second thing was, even though I loved teaching and I loved doing research, I felt like there was pressure on how those things got achieved in an academic environment that I wasn't fully comfortable with. And some of that was like, preparing manuscripts for publication and having to be really careful about like citing the people who were on the editorial boards of a journal, even if that wasn't the right citation. That sort of thing really bothered me. Or, in terms of teaching the students, I saw a lot of the grade competition and like people, professors who would do things towards the end of the semester to try to juice their student ratings because that mattered so much. So, I worked with I was a TA for one faculty member who would always have a quiz on the syllabus right around evaluation time that she'd cancel last minute, like right before the evaluations went out. And it was never planned to be a real part of the grade. And I was like, "Ah, I just don't like that those sorts of social dynamics get in the way of doing the best possible job because I don't think that the role of an educator is to make the students as happy as possible all the time. Like sometimes growth and achievement are uncomfortable for people. And I just felt like there were these like popularity contest elements. So not to say these things don't exist in industry. I just sort of didn't like them in academia and felt like, well, maybe I should go make more money.
One of the most traumatic job experiences I ever had was after my undergrad. So I graduated from Swarthmore in 3 years.
Mhm.
And then I went to work. I was still working at Swarthmore as a researcher, but then I went to work with a guy, Mike Lowe at Drexel, and he was on the editorial board of one of the things. And so I was the guy coordinating, trying to drum up reviewers and send things
Oh
out,
yeah,
and
yeah.
reading their reviews and things. And you just, if you see the back end, you're like, oh my God, like I know who the reviewer is, and I know they're just objecting to the fact that they're not cited in this thing, and they think
Yep.
they should have been. It's just like such a disillusioning experience to go from being a consumer of research to somebody who sort of, you see how the sausage is made, and you go, whew.
Yep. Oh, I also remember when I was back in undergrad and taking those survey courses, a really common assignment in all of them was you're going to read, a peer-reviewed paper and you're going to write a 3-page reflection on ways it could be improved. And I remember at the time being like, what do I, a mere 19-year-old, know about improving this published research? And now I look back and I'm like, oh, girl, there was so much you could have said.
Just rip into it because,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%. It is. I could totally hear how that, so so the choice piece is very real. We hear this a lot actually from other applied behavioral scientists is that people have
Yeah.
this realization, particularly on the piece that you noted around geography. People are like,
Mhm.
schools are in particular places that may or may not be attractive places to live given your personality, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have a lot of choice, right? Like you're going
Yeah.
to go where the academic job market in that moment sends you. it's likely you'll marry another academic. And so then it's going to become twice as complicated. People are going to do this. A lot of couples do this TikTok thing, right? Where one of
Yep.
them, gets to choose one time and the other gets to choose the other time. And, it is a very, I mean, that's fraught. Um, so you start to have these doubts. Did that coalesce as like, hey, I'm going to go into business, or it just like, where did that transition from I'm doubting the thing that I'm in to maybe I'm running towards something rather than away from something?
Well, Matt, I hope you've learned I just stumble my way into good situations because yet again, I hedged my bets on this one. I was feeling a lot of doubt internally, but I didn't like break away and say I'm not going to do this. So one of the things that I did right away that I'm really grateful for is I diversified my research, which is like absolutely not the thing to do in grad school. They want you to get more and more focused. But by the time I was in the end of my fourth year, I think I was working with four different faculty members in labs. And part of what I did was I chose to use qualitative research methods for my dissertation. Michigan is a very heavy quant school, so but I did it on purpose. I chose a different advisor for my dissertation. I had Margaret on my committee, but I had Lance Sandiland supervise. He's more of a qualitative researcher because I wanted to learn a different skill set. I did some research through the business school on different topics. I just sort of wanted to have a lot of different skills that I could call upon because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did go through an intensive that Michigan offered called Preparing Future Faculty. So it's fun. I just Googled myself the other day and found my faculty statement is available online through one of Michigan's things. And it's funny because I read it and I'm like, oh, like I actually still agree with myself. but um, but yeah, I was hedging my bets, and then I did go on the academic job market. I sent out my faculty packets and stuff, and I remember the day that I really made the decision. I got invited to go to Holy Cross, which is in Worcester, Mass,
Yep.
in a great school. Like I actually think that if I were going to teach, that would be the type of academic environment I would love to be in. But I got invited for an interview and I had that gut feeling of just this isn't it. And I can't waste their time hosting me for something that I already know I don't want to do. And so that was sort of my formal, like I've made this decision and had to sort of let my advisors know like I don't need any more recommendation letters from you. um
JK. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I love that you bring up the diversity piece. That is really key, and I think it's a really key insight because academia does really want you to focus, right? The
Mhm.
narrower your stream of research, and there are people like Barry Schwartz who get an opportunity to like maybe have a second or third chapter to that, but like they want you to be fairly narrow. But
Yeah.
and conversely, in business, right, having a broad set of skills is very attractive. I
Mhm.
remember uh, at the beginning of grad school, we all apply for the NSF fellowship.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you get to see your reviewers' comments, and I did quite well. I was a finalist for the NSF, but it was really interesting to me because like some of the reviewers were like, "We love the diversity. He seems to study all these different things, and isn't that exciting?" And then one guy was like, "Terrible! Stop studying so many things. Like study one thing and one thing." And I was like, "Wow, those are really different reactions to the same program
Mhm.
of published papers." And
Right.
it is a really key. What do you did you? I mean, obviously, in retrospect, you know this. You made it sound very intentional. Hey, I'm going to go spread. Was that you just following your natural instinct, or had someone told you, hey, in business, you're going to want to do this? Or like, how did that sort of come about for you?
It was a combination of natural instinct. I will say, and this is a little bit in retrospect, one of the things that I think I have a good instinct, and I think part of the reason why is because I do have sort of a core set of interests that have been persistent across most of my life. And so, in any given moment, I think I'm pretty good at evaluating the choices in front of me and picking the ones that are best aligned with, like, kind of my authentic interests. And that has served me well. So that was a piece of it. And I think a piece of it was also deliberately exploring because I didn't know, like, I had no idea that that would serve me well in business, or that, business doesn't necessarily look for the same level of focus. But I was thinking, like, hey, if I work with some business school professors in addition to some psychology professors, maybe they can help me figure out the next step, or maybe the things I'll learn in their lab will be the stepping stone into a job.
So you're
So
having this reaction to the academic environment where you're like, well, I know it's not this. I don't know what it is though. And so
exactly.
I'm going to have a survey
Exactly.
course to try and find wonk around a little bit to try and find where it was.
Right.
And so, you have this experience with Holy Cross. Again, you're like, okay, I know it's not, I have this opportunity and it feels hinky and I know I don't want to take it and I know I'm not going to do that.
Hmm.
At what, where did you start to discover, and therefore I will go towards something?
Yeah, so I remember I went to the Office of Career Services at Michigan asking for help, and I remember the career counselor there was like, "We don't see PhD students
Yes,
from this
say
office."
what you were the only PhD program to have ever walked into that office.
Yep, yep. And I remember she said to me, "Well, I think Procter and Gamble hires PhDs." And so I looked at P&G and I was like, "Do they? I don't know. I mean, they hire like chemists, and they do like in their market research hire social scientists, but at the time I was like, I'm not a chemist, like." So that was a dead end. One of the things I ended up doing, the way the financial support worked at Michigan for PhD students is you were funded for 9 months of the year from your third year onward. And that was partially from being a research assistant. It was partially from teaching. I had to teach a total of 4 semesters. I negotiated to teach a fifth semester for an extra semester of funding. And the thing I had to give up to do that was I couldn't graduate on time. I defended my dissertation the day after the deadline to walk in the spring of my fifth year, but it meant I had funding that summer to search for a job. So I was completely done. So that I didn't get to walk in the ceremony, which is like sometimes I regret. Whatever. I don't have the cool pictures of me in the hood and everything, but I had a few paid months to look for a job, and that was good because I had no freaking idea what I was going to do. And at this point, I had met my husband. We got engaged right around the time that I defended my dissertation. And he had just started his PhD at Michigan. So I did have it, I was going to stay in Michigan until he finished. So I at least had a geographic boundary. But I was looking through an old hard drive a couple years ago and I found a folder of all of the cover letters that I sent out. I had no freaking idea what I was going to do. I sent out probably 60, 70 letters and I was applying for all manner of jobs. And I was looking through the letters and I'm like, thank God I didn't get some of these because I was almost like I could sort of smell the desperation in retrospect. And one class of jobs I kept applying for was like these really quantitative jobs, survey building and analysis. And that's just never been my strength or my passion. I'm not terrible at it, but it's not what I want my career to focus on. And I'm just like so grateful that that particular set of applications didn't pan out. But I was lucky. I had 2 job offers. One was at a company that does like consumer satisfaction surveys, and the other was for an agency that mostly worked with pharma companies, doing a lot of their like branding and sales training stuff. But I got that. That's the one I took. I ended up doing research on their innovation team.
And what made that? You have these 2 offers in front of you. What made? I mean, I hear you on the desperation piece. There are lots of,
Mhm.
we can all play the alternative universes game. I got offered a job doing quant out of college, and somewhere in some universe, there's Matt Wallard still in a cubicle on a phone, you know, you know, typing away, doing phone surveys and analyzing the data, right? Like, there's some terrible universe out there where that guy is even more bald and even more overweight. Um, what you have these 2 offers in front of you. What what makes you go one way rather than the? I mean, in some ways,
Yeah.
consumer, that marketing piece sounds closer to maybe a traditional social psych job. What made you go this other route?
Well, there were 2 things. One is the first company, they were really challenging to me in the interview about the fact that I had a PhD. Just like we know that people with PhDs are just basically biding their time until they can go back to academia. Like they kind of negged me and I didn't get a really good feeling interpersonally from that. Whereas the hiring manager at the other job had his PhD. So that was a little bit more comfortable. But the second thing was the money. And if I recall, the survey job offered me 45K and the other one offered me 50 and I negotiated up to 55. So felt pretty wealthy.
Well, and while those $10,000 is not maybe a massive difference, particularly in this economy, at the time it's 20% of your salary, and ten thousand
Absolutely.
dollars back then was a lot more money than it was today.
Right. Well, and I mean, coming off of my grad school stipend too, like, whoa, I really did feel very, very flush.
$60,000. Who needs equity, baby?
Right.
Sixty
Woo!
thousand dollars. I know this story.
Yep.
So you get in here. It feels like a more comfortable place. You're going to be supervised by a PhD, or you're going to be reporting to a PhD. Was it what you expected? Did you know what to expect? Like, how did you sort of crash land into this place?
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect. And right away there were like things I liked about it and things I didn't like about it. I did feel really self-conscious about having the PhD, and I'm not sure why, in retrospect, I did feel so self-conscious about it. Because again, I had a hiring manager who had one, so it wasn't like I was the only person in the company. But I did definitely feel like I had a steep learning curve because, I was 27 years old. So I was of an age with people in the company who were, maybe on their second or third job or who had been with the company 5, 6 years, but I was brand new. So it was sort of like my age and my experience didn't quite line up. And the experience I did have was in such a different world. So I do remember sort of struggling and like struggling, what should a document look like for this environment? I know it's not an academic paper, but like what does it look like? And there was a lot of, yeah, not producing quite the right thing. I definitely got a lot of feedback at that job in particular. And, for many years into my career that I was like too academic with a lot of the thing that I was producing. So it was a tough transition, but I also really liked a lot of it. And I remember one thing I particularly liked was going home and not having to work at night.
Yeah,
Miss those days.
yeah, we don't talk enough about the degree to which academia really is sort of a bizarre, you know, 25/8 kind of job where, because it just can be done at any time. And so because it can be done at any time, it kind of does get done at any time.
Well, I also think there's this expectation in academia that you do have a passion for your topic, that like your personality and your work are one and the same. And so if you're not, thinking and writing and working, like you're not good enough at your job, where I do think in industry, even at our level, where it's like, I think, we're expected to live and breathe and eat our work much more than people starting out. But I also think that it's understood that there's a separation of person and work.
Yes, in a way that academia, kind of like nonprofits, can
Hmm.
have that sort of, I don't want to say the word exploitative, but I mean, it can be sort of exploitative. That sort of, you're doing this because you love it, right? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, right?
And therefore, we don't have to pay you what you're worth.
That's right. And we can, make all sorts of demands on you that are unreasonable and
Hmm.
so you get into this environment, it's very different. I love that you mentioned, hey, I got a lot of feedback at the beginning that I'm not producing the thing that they're wanting. You were there, almost 2 years.
Yep.
Talk to me about the transition to health media, where you were there for quite a bit longer. Uh,
Yeah.
like, talk to me about that movement into, was there a moment where they were right, the other company was right, and you were thinking about going back to your PhD, or you were like, nope, this is right, and I want to keep going, and this is, I'm not going to go become an academic.
No, I have never ever considered going back into academia. Like once that decision was made, it felt right. I had some imposter syndrome's not the right term. I guess I felt like my achievements maybe weren't as important as some of my friends, and that persisted until fairly recently. Like now I'm sort of over that, but I never regretted it. I was like, I've chosen the right thing for me. I found health media because of that other job. So I was on the innovation team. Part of my role was doing competitive intelligence. I was supposed to be looking for kind of new products and services and capabilities that our pharmaceutical clients might want to start thinking about wrapping into their offerings, like especially if they're building patient support programs or, anything that would sort of help them sell their product. And I found a health media program that they'd built for Takeda. It was called Takeda Cares, and it was a digital health coaching program for people with diabetes. And for some reason, it was not password protected. Like I know now it should have been, but it was just like available open on the web, and I was able to go through and use it and take it. And so the whole health media thing was this very personalized web experience where you fill out a long self-report survey and it generates a coaching plan for you keyed off of everything that you've put in. And it really was very in-depth and very strongly based on behavioral science. And so given my background in education, I was able to recognize just sort of the quality and importance of what I was experiencing. And so, I had sort of done my competitive intelligence on it for my job, but then I look up the company. They were 2 miles from my house. And I had a long commute at the time. It was like over an hour commute into Ferndale, which is like near Detroit. And then they were hiring for a content developer. And recall, I had always thought I'd be a writer. So,
This just feels like Sarah, you're like, I could cut my commute in half. I
yep.
like the point you made in there in the sort of like real knows real. I mean, one of the ways to,
Mhm.
to figure out when you want to work is to look at work that you really admire and go, well, I want to be around the people who are
Yeah.
doing the work that I admire.
Yes. Yes. So I applied for that job, and it was one of those, like, that was probably the first time I've ever applied for a job, where, and I've recognized this at other points in my career now, like I kind of knew, I just knew in the application, like they had a task that they wanted you to complete as part of the application. I remember sitting at my kitchen table and like enjoying the task and being like, I'm doing a good job. I know I'm doing a good job because I understand what they're asking and I have the right skills for this. And just, the interviews, like I loved the people, I felt comfortable and confident. And, when I got the job offer, it was a no-brainer. And I really consider health media the place where I learned what I want to do as a grown-up, because that's, what I do today, I feel like is a natural continuation of that. But learning about the digital aspect of bringing behavioral science to people in healthcare, like all of those threads came together for the first time. And I realized this is what I love.
Got it. Um, and were there people there that you could work with that had the same sort of interests, or were you on an island, or like tell me a
Oh,
little
no. That was the thing that was wonderful about it. And it's funny, again, like as a leader at a startup, I will sometimes tell the people on my team about some of these experiences because it was so messy. It was a startup. And I think I had 6 or 7 different job titles and business cards in my first couple years because we were constantly reorganizing and moving people onto different teams. And, everybody's got to huddle around this or that. And so I started as a content developer. I didn't stay in that role very long. I ended up becoming part of the behavioral science team, but there was a behavioral science team, and they were focused at the time very much on like training the content developers and other folks in the company to use the behavioral science principles. So they were producing a lot of, training guides. I think I still have somewhere like a 40 or 50 page, intro to behavioral science for writing health content that one of the behavioral scientists produced. They were doing a lot of analytics and customer pitching type stuff, but not necessarily hands-on on the product.
Mm,
And then there were the people who were doing what I was doing, which was the writing and the hands-on on the product. And a lot of them also had behavioral science training, not necessarily the Ph.D., but a lot of people with masters in public health or other social sciences. And so I almost had like 2 different groups of people that I was part of. And one of the things I realized really quickly is that it is important for me to have that hands-on bit. And so I'd say that's a thing that's come to define my career as well.
yeah, you don't want to just be in a center of excellence churning out
Mhm.
training. Although you have this educational train, one of the things that academia does do for you is teach you how to teach,
Right.
right? And so you do have this quiver, this arrow in your quiver of sort of like, hey, I can produce this training material and things, but you're
Mhm.
enriched by the doing of it. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, that makes sense. And you go,
Yeah.
I mean, you go through a big journey with them, right? Sort of through moving on to the behavioral science team, and then you get acquired by J&J,
Yeah.
go into more sort of the J&J larger ecosystem thing, which also had its own sort of behavioral science viewpoint and capabilities and sort of versions of how you do this. How did
Mhm.
you consistently sort of like work your way up, work your way up, work your way up as you go through this piece? Talk to me a little bit about just like how you're managing this process going through, because there's a lot of change going on around you.
Yeah, and I think this is actually where it served me well that I'm one of those, stumble into the next thing. People like I couldn't tell you right now what I want to be doing in 5 years, but I'm sort of good at looking at what's on the table at the moment and how do I make the most of this? How do I extract value from it? How do I show up and perform well in this moment? I didn't feel super stressed out by all of that change. I remember not really feeling too stressed out about changes in the reporting structure. There was a time at J&J, well, Health Media J&J. To me, it's all kind of one experience because we did stay as an operating group through the whole thing.
Right.
But someone I had reported to me for a while. So there were changes like that, and we just sort of talked about it, like made it not awkward because we acknowledged it, and that's a person I'm still friends with today. And it's just going through all of that transition with J&J as well. Like I remember going into the HR office and they had mapped our job titles onto the J&J catalog of job titles and got a raise because they brought our salaries into line with
Their
what they offered as. Yeah, and actually that was where I first started to get equity too, so that was cool. But just sort of taking it as it came was important. And I think that's actually maybe been one of the rougher transitions for me into executive life because I can't be so laissez-faire about that stuff. I do have to be more strategic and deliberate in this particular role. And hopefully I'm doing okay doing that for a team and a company as opposed to just me as a person. But for me as a person, it served me really well to be able to ride with the waves a little bit on this stuff.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is it's an interesting piece of uh, contradictory advice that I think young people get, right? Where they're like, oh, you got to like decide that you're going there and then march your way
Mhm.
there, right? Where in reality, a lot of the senior people, what has helped them rise has been their ability to sort of go a little bit over here and a little bit over there. And sometimes I have to go off the track a little bit to sort of make that work. And that can come from there are people who are deeply strategic about that. They're very mature, they're very thoughtful, and hopefully we as get older become more of those people. But there's also a version that's just ignorance. I don't know that I'm supposed to be reacting to these things,
Right.
and so I just am sort of doing the do because I don't know that I'm
Yep.
supposed to be paying attention to those things. Academic politics is a great example of this, right? You know, it works best when you ignore them, but you can either ignore them out of maturity or a complete obliviousness that they're happening at all.
Right, right.
And so you're sort of just taking it as it comes, takes it out. How did you know when it's time to leave? Given that
So,
you're like taking it as it comes, which the trap of taking it as it comes is you can end up staying forever, right?
right,
Because
right.
there's always the next, you roll with that punch and you roll with this punch, and you can just sort of end up in the same place because you're just bobbing.
Yeah. Yeah. Leaving J&J was a hard decision, but also an easy one. I loved working there, and I have always said, I still say I would work for J&J again if the stars aligned and it made sense. But one of the things that had happened, my husband did finish grad school eventually, and we decided to move to Boston, where I'm from. And I became a remote employee at a time before that was really common.
Yeah.
So for about a year, year and a half, I worked out of my living room. I had a landline, and it was hard. I traveled a lot. I would go back to Ann Arbor to the office, and also even before that, when I was still living in Michigan, because of the nature of J&J, I was traveling a lot to other J&J offices. So I was already on the road a lot, even before I became remote. But over time, I started to see that the separation from the office culture was changing the opportunities I had ahead of me. I was, not hearing those water cooler conversations. I wasn't seeing some of the opportunities to jump on top of and get myself involved in this cool side project or influence the direction something was taking. At some point, J&J did open an office in the Boston area, which is still there. It's their innovation center, but it's really focused on like early molecule development and investing in biotech. So I was able to get a desk there, and the people who worked there were absolutely wonderful. They actually let me attend a lot of their meetings, and I got to learn some like really cool stuff about how pharma companies do invest in these early stage technologies and support these companies. But it wasn't my day-to-day work, and it wasn't giving me those same sorts of direct opportunities. And so it just sort of got to a point where I could see that my career trajectory was slowing down, that I just was, the waves that I was riding weren't as powerful as the ones that I had had before me. And so it felt like time to move on. And I started looking for what was next.
Yeah, I vividly, your J&J is my Microsoft. I go back there. I think
Yeah.
it was a fantastic place to work at the Stars Aligned. I go back, and I knew when I left Seattle, it was for family things, but I knew in going to go be the head of ventures in New York, it was not. That was not a growth. That was not a growth role, right?
Right.
You sort of
Right.
know, yeah, you can stay here, right? We'll probably always find something for you. We'll probably always be happy to have you, but you're not in headquarters. You're not gonna, and maybe that's changed a bit over time, but
Yeah.
in
Yeah. No,
2015,
I know people who stayed with J&J, and they are happy with the choices they made and they're right for them, but they haven't had the type of career growth that I've had. And I have always been interested. Again, like I've never sat down and said I want to be a chief behavioral officer, but I am, this achievement oriented, like the growth, the competence has always been something that I look for. And I don't feel like I would have gotten that if I'd stayed at J&J in that role, in that structure.
yeah. And so you look for something closer to home in Boston, which is
Mhm.
CVS Health, obviously, which has also produced a lot of really, wonderful behavioral scientists have come through the CVS pipeline. Um, you're there for a bit, right?
A
Gloss
little
over
bit.
that one indeed, a little bit. Like, then you go to Mad Pow, which is this another very long stint. Talk to me about the sort of stepping stone that is going to something for a short time before finding the sort of next long thing.
Well, actually, I had job offers from Mad Pow and CVS at the same time.
Oh,
And I chose CVS again first of all, it did have better pay and benefits, what I perceived as better pay and benefits. In retrospect, I think I maybe didn't understand some of that as well as I might have. But I also thought that CVS would feel like more of a continuation of J&J because on paper they look like somewhat similar organizations, right? Like roughly same number of employees globally and big companies. I was joining CVS's brand new digital innovation lab in Boston, and it felt to me sort of similar to working for the former health media unit inside of J&J. So I was like, this might feel like a more comfortable home for me than going to an agency. My very first job was an agency, and there were things I hadn't liked about that, and so I was like, just maybe this is going to be the better fit. And what I learned is that actually the org structure of J&J lends itself better to innovation. Or it's still structured this way. I don't know the exact number anymore because they've spun off Kenvue and all that. But at the time, it was three sort of divisions, and they had about 250 separate operating companies under those three divisions, and they were semi-autonomous. So it was meaningful that I was still in this former health media unit, and very small thing, but like I could go online and Outlook and look in the directory by operating company and find somebody where when I got to CVS, it is one company. So 250,000 people. And if I wanted to find in the directory, like who owns this website, there was no way that I could go look at like who's in the digital org. So I found it was just harder to navigate, harder to get things done. It was much more of a traditional big company, and I didn't realize that J&J wasn't.
yeah.
So, I didn't feel like I was sort of able to do my thing. It was really, really hard to get things done. And then I had drinks with Dustin DiTomaso at Mad Pow, who started the behavior change design group there. Like we'd stayed in touch. I think I had even known him actually before I first interviewed because I'd been a Mad Pow fan for a while. They used to throw a really great conference that I'd attended a few times, and I'd grown to meet the people just through you socialize with folks who are doing similar work in the community and yeah, we just met up for drinks, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so miserable." And he was like, "Well, actually, it turns out I might be hiring." And so we were able to work out that I
Part
could
two, you
basically,
passed on me the
yeah, yeah.
first time, but
I felt so lucky because I really had been kicking myself for, taking the wrong choice at that juncture. And it's funny because, again, looking back, I think it actually worked out. I learned a lot at CVS, and I'm glad that I have that experience on my resume. And I think that if I had joined Mad Pow at that original time, it might not have worked out because they had some rough time that year and they had to make some staff cuts. So who knows? I would have been one of the newer people. I might have been affected, but it worked out where I could do a year at CVS and then get into Mad Pow. And turned out that Mad Pow actually felt a lot like my experience at J&J because, at J&J, it was almost like I was a consultant to other J&J companies. And then at Mad Pow, I'm a consultant to our client companies.
right. And so, I could see the parallels for sure, right? Whether those are internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, there is still sort of
Mhm.
that consultative center of excellence sort of version of doing this work. Mad Pow makes total sense. You write the book there, right, which is a wonderful,
Yep.
lovely book. Um, like, you get to have, it's another, 5 years of polishing this, this directionality, stepping into a very big leadership role, right, starting to be more of the kind of more senior executive version of behavioral science, which unfortunately, for those of you that don't know, doesn't always involve doing a lot of behavioral science, right? Like you have to just there's a whole bunch of skills that are just being an exec, hiring, firing, dealing with all of the like
Yep.
all of the
Well, I
stuff.
always, I joke, not joke. My job is going to meetings.
Yep, that's what it is, which
Yep.
is fine, and it's just a decision you make. I think all of us miss a part of some of that direct research, and if you're really lucky, you find a way to get that into your life somehow. But it is a different job that not everybody wants to do.
Yeah.
Um, what I want to talk a little bit about in our last couple of minutes is actually moving from Mad Pow to Lirio, right?
Hmm.
Because while Lirio does have clients, it's not a consulting company in the sort of traditional sense of the Mad Pow sense of the word. What made you decide, hey, I want to go to a product company? This is where I want to step into.
Yeah, actually kind of similar leaving J&J. Leaving Mad Pow was like a hard, easy decision. So Mad Pow also got acquired while I was there by a company called Tech Mahindra.
Right,
And one of the things that I've learned now through my two acquisition experiences, at least my experiences have had this in common, it takes about 2 years for the acquiring company to really, absorb you and make you part of their environment.
right,
And so that was just starting to happen with Tech Mahindra and Mad Pow. And I felt where J&J had been a really, comfortable fit for me. Tech Mahindra was less so. They're not necessarily focused on healthcare or mission driven. They're much more of like a large tech organization. And I was just starting to see that the projects that were coming in and sort of the strategic direction of the company was getting further and further away from some of the things that, filled my cup. So there was that. I will say I absolutely adored the people at Mad Pow and, still stay in touch with so many of them. And so that was the part that made it hard. Lirio actually reached out to me, or I had a recruiter reach out to me for the Lirio role, and it was one of those things where when I saw the job description, it was like, "Is this is this a joke? Like this is so perfect for me. Like this is just exactly what I do." And it reminded me a lot of health media, not J&J, but health media. And so, Lirio's focus is very much on personalizing the way that we talk to people about their health behaviors, using behavioral science in this really personalized, we use the phrase N of one. So way to activate them, to empower them. And that's exactly what health media was doing as well, albeit with like a different format and technology. And so that was just really resonant. And it was one of those things I wasn't totally committed at that point to leaving or totally sold on Lirio. And part of it was because Lirio's positioning feels very heavily behavioral economics. Like our product is called precision nudging, and I'm not really a behavioral economics gal for the most part, but figured why not do the interviews? Why not pursue this a little bit? And as I was going through the interviews, first of all, I learned that the behavioral science was not just behavioral economics. Like that's really a branding choice, and the communications we send are certainly nudges, but the content of them builds on a much deeper toolbox. But it was also like, you just sometimes know when you're talking to people. I was like, these are my people. Like, these are people who I asked everybody in the interviews about the ethics of using AI, and their answers were not necessarily consistent, but every last person that I talked to had thought about it and was thinking about it and was not just sort of blindly proceeding with this idea that, AI good, we should use. And that was really important to me. It was I remember talking to Chris Simons, our chief AI scientist, and he does this thing where he'll go into these long bios of everybody on his team. I have this one person who's a distinguished scholar it's too much, but what it tells me and what turned out to be totally true is he really understands everyone who's on his team and values what they individually bring to the table. And he doesn't see this as just like, these are 10 people who are interchangeable to do the work. It's like I've assembled the right puzzle pieces to each bring something special to what we're building. And so, yeah, just all those interviews and talking to those individual people, by the end of it, I was like, I need to get this job. Like, I have to work with this company. I'm so excited to become a part of this. And so when I did get the offer, that was a really easy yes.
yeah. And to your point, it is a really, in some ways, very perfect. You know, I the first startup I ever worked in was in personal finance, right?
Mhm.
And I look with envy on the toolkit that is now available to personal finance. Like we couldn't move money. There was like,
Right,
right?
right.
Like we didn't have that capability. All of our scraping was sort of not, it was sort of like actual manual, there were companies that scraped it for you and then you subscribe to a fee to scraping, as opposed to something like Plaid where, you can get a direct from
Yeah.
the bank, version of thing. And so in some ways, Lirio is a realization of like, hey, these goals we've always had, but now we have a tech stack that actually backs up our ability to do that at scale. Uh,
Right, totally. I mean, all of the stuff that we're doing with AI, right? So, like, basically, we're able to look at a ton of data about a person, detect the signal from the noise, and use that to select from, a universe of possible content, and pick the right stuff for that person. At Health Media, we were hand engineering all of that. We were basically saying, this is the data we need, and if this, then that. And like part of being a content developer there was actually writing out that code. It was we were writing code in addition to writing the content. And sometimes there's power in having those rules-driven journeys. We do some rules-driven stuff at Lirio, but like my God, to be able to take in a messy data set And, even Chris gives this example all the time in terms of using transformers with AI. Like, if we know that you make $100,000, that could be good or bad. But if we also know what city you live in and that you have 0 kids or 6 kids, like now we have a story and we can understand what that means in a context. To do that with a rules-driven journey is so labor intensive, where AI makes it a snap.
Yeah. When I first started at Clover Health, you will love this story. When I first started at Clover Health, Impulse was going to do an IVR for us. So I built all of the branches I want, and they were like, yeah, there's no way you could do that, man. You have like 120 different branches. And I'm like, yeah, and they're like, we are not programming this, man. Like, no one on our side is willing to go make a 120 branch IVR thing. Whereas today, this is, trivially easy, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
comparatively to doing it manually, I had this big spreadsheet that flowed it all out. It was just an insanely different proposition.
Right.
Um,
Well, let me tell you, Health Media would have built that out for you. Well, we didn't do IVR. We worked with Alexa, not Alexa, sorry. Alex Strain was there. Who was it? HMS was they were
it's changed names since they,
I know they've changed names, but anyway, we had an IVR partner and we absolutely would have done the 120. Like that was Health Media's whole thing. Like we will make these really complex personalizations.
yeah. And so you're at this, so you've come full circle. You
Yeah.
really just,
That's what it feels like.
yeah. Uh, Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I mean, I think, you and I have known each other for a very long time at this point.
Yeah.
But, it's really fun to do the podcast because we have both ends of the spectrum. So it's people like you and me and Steph Habib who maybe are a little bit older. And then you have people like Pete Judo, who's like, my undergraduate degree is in applied behavioral science. I'm like, even the fathoming the notion that you could do that and people were using words like that at that, is such a different
Yeah, we didn't
perspective.
even call it behavioral science.
100%, right?
Yeah.
Social psychologists
Yep. Yep.
did it. I was the lead scientist or the head of science or, like we just call it science.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I used to say like if I could go back and do anything different with my education, just the education part, because when you're in school, right, you can take any classes you want without additional tuition. I'm like, I should have taken some computer science courses so that I could code. And now I'm like, that wouldn't help me anymore because first of all, any computer language I learned would probably be outdated. And secondly, I can vibe code now. It's not the
Yeah.
same. I understand it's not quite the same, but it's like the tools that we have ahead of us, the opportunities ahead of us, they've changed so much.
Well, I mean, the democratization of both you and I wrote books because we want to democratize this discipline,
Mhm.
right? In the same way that, AI has or vibe coding has sort of allowed for a different set of people to access these things. There was a very particular version of behavioral science that was like, it's going to be controlled by PhDs in the academe who are going to decide what truth is, and maybe you'll get
Mhm.
to apply it, but it's going to come from the tower on the hill. And I think there's
Right.
a very different
Right.
version of this that's like, hey, circumstances are unique. We can use experimentation in situ to do things. It doesn't have to be controlled by somebody else. Like everyone is empowered to run an experiment and to try things and to like
Yeah.
draw inference. And that's a very different version of how truth functions in the world.
One of the things that I was really excited to see is a move towards accepting real world evidence in digital health as, evidence that something might work or how it might work. Because I think for so long we were locked into this academic model of it has to be, an incredibly controlled RCT. And like, yes, that has its place, but the fact is people use these products in the messy real world. And if we don't look at the real world evidence, we're not really going to understand how to make them better.
Yeah, I don't have to be perfectly right. I just have to be right enough.
Exactly. I use the phrase a lot at work, finger in the wind. Like, let me put my finger in the wind and get in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if the cost benefit ratio, if the cost is low and the benefit is high, I don't have to be that certain, right?
Right.
If there
Right.
is a 1 in a million chance that you and I snapping our fingers together right now will cure cancer,
Why
well,
not?
here we go, baby. That feels worth it. Really high outcome. It's not that hard for you and I to snap our fingers, even if it's 1 in a million. Let's take a
Yeah.
flyer.
Let's do
Science,
it.
the academe, just hates that, right? Like,
Right.
that is not how we set people up to do this. And so I love that you have fashioned this career out of doing these things. And I never ask people what comes next, because I think a lot of behavioral scientists don't know. We don't know where we want to go next. Right now, you're really enjoying Lirio. You're doing really amazing. I think you're really right at that edge of, how AI and behavioral science come together in the part that's more interesting to me. There are these sort of like synthetic participants, market
Oh
research
yeah.
sort of versions of things, which I just am not, that's not ever particular. How do we
Yeah, I
generate
agree.
insights better is not like my primary problem in the world. I'm really good at generating insights. That's not the problem.
Right.
Right. Um, so I love that you're at this place. I love to see you keep going. Thank you so much for sharing your story and sort of showing people that they can go through this trajectory of, and I love, as you said, you just stumble into the next thing. I think we didn't, to the fact that we didn't call it applied behavioral science, there was no linear version of this.
No, no. And actually, I found I do have, young people reach out to me for career advice, and I feel bad. I've gotten worse and worse at it because I just don't know at this point. Like they're coming into a different world than I did. And my journey, I hope people don't have to follow my journey of just stumbling into the next thing. Like we do have career paths now.
Yeah. And to people's benefit, right? I
Yes.
think there's a lot of potential that, I saw the best minds of my generation, right? Like there's a lot of people who probably could have come with you and I on this journey that didn't, for whatever reason, get
Hmm.
to come because there was no pathway for them. And you and I sort
Right.
of were willing to bracken our way through it, but that's not for everybody and excludes lots of kinds of people, right? You and
Right.
I had less to lose, right? So you don't have a lot to lose. You can sort of,
Right.
it's a little easier. I think that trailblazer is not an inappropriate word for the work that you've done because it really does allow for some of those other pathways for people to come in.
Yeah. Well, and I think you and I both care a lot about making sure that we're not pulling up the ladder behind us, and
Yeah.
also that the people who come along, don't have to have had a particular set of, training or like, yes, there's skills and knowledge that you need, but those shouldn't be limited to only a certain type of person. So, I've found it incredibly rewarding to be able to lead a team and hire people and train people and, bring them through.
And you've had such a lovely career, and I look forward to what happens next.
Thank you.
What
Me too.
happens? Do you see how I did not make you make an AI prediction here? No predictions necessary, folks. We can just be in awe of Amy as she is. She doesn't have to tell us where it's all going. Amy, thank you so much for being honest with everyone. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me.